Lyra had always felt different. From the day she was born, whispers followed her through the narrow streets of her alien settlement. She belonged to a proud and ancient race, known for their wisdom and flawless beauty, but somehow she never seemed to fit the picture her people expected. Where others carried themselves with calm dignity, Lyra was curious, restless, and full of questions. Instead of sitting quietly through lessons of tradition, she would wander off to the outer valleys, gazing at the stars and wondering about other worlds. Her people did not admire such behavior. They believed that curiosity was dangerous and that outsiders were to be avoided. To them, discipline and perfection were everything, and Lyra's questions sounded like weakness. Children her age teased her. Adults shook their heads when she walked past. Some even muttered that she was a mistake, someone who did not deserve to be called one of them. Lyra tried to ignore their words, but inside, each one left a scar. When she sat by the river in the evenings, she often asked herself why she was born different. She had the same silver eyes and smooth skin as the others, yet she felt like a stranger in her own world. Her people wore long robes woven from crystal fibers, shining in the light of the suns, but when she wore them, she only felt more out of place, as if she were pretending to be someone she was not. The rejection followed her everywhere. When there were festivals, no one asked her to join their dance circles. When food was shared, she was given her portion last, and many avoided her table. The elders rarely spoke to her except to warn her not to wander too far, not to break the rules, not to bring shame. Slowly, she learned to keep to herself, finding comfort in the quiet spaces between the cliffs or under the night sky where the stars burned brighter than her people's harsh eyes. Deep down, she still longed for connection. She watched families laughing together, friends whispering secrets, lovers walking hand in hand under the glowing moons. She dreamed of having someone who would look at her, not with pity or suspicion, but with warmth. But those dreams always faded when she woke to the cold truth that she was alone. Despite this loneliness, Lyra carried something inside her that no rejection could erase. She had a soft heart and a quiet strength. When others were in need, she helped without hesitation. Once, when a child fell near the cliffs, she was the first to climb down and bring him to safety, even though the parents barely thanked her. Another time, when storms destroyed part of the crops, she worked day and night to save what she could. No matter how they treated her, she could not close her heart to others' suffering. But the more she showed kindness, the more they called her strange. To them, compassion for weakness was itself a weakness. They valued strength, logic, and perfection, while Lyra valued care, curiosity, and courage. The distance between her and her people grew wider every year, until she stopped trying to prove herself at all. In her quiet moments, she would climb the highest hill near the settlement, sit with her knees drawn to her chest, and stare at the horizon. She loved watching the stars appear one by one, thinking that somewhere out there must be beings who felt as she did, beings who asked questions, who cared about others, who searched for meaning. She whispered her thoughts to the sky, half believing that someone somewhere might hear her. But each dawn returned her to the same reality. She was unwanted, unseen, and unheard by the very people who should have loved her. Every time she walked past their watchful eyes, she carried the quiet pain of rejection in her chest, like a stone she could never put down. Lyra's life might have gone on like this forever, unnoticed and unloved, if not for the arrival of strangers from the stars. At that time, she did not yet know how her fate would change or that her loneliness would one day lead her to the one who truly saw her. For now, she only knew the sting of being different, the weight of silence, and the hope, buried deep inside, that maybe somewhere in the wide universe, she had a place where she belonged, and though she did not yet understand it, her heart, scarred but unbroken, was quietly preparing her for the moment when someone would finally look at her, not as an outcast, but as something precious. The day the humans arrived was unlike any other in Lyra's memory. Her people had spoken of humans before, often with distrust. They called them reckless wanderers from a harsh world, beings who thrived in danger and carried chaos wherever they went. Lyra, however, felt a quiet spark of curiosity when she heard the word human. She wondered what kind of hearts they carried inside, what stories they might tell, and why the stars had guided them so far from their own home. The landing was announced with echoes of thunder. Ships of steel and fire pierced through the clouds, lowering themselves onto the flat plain beyond the settlement. Her people gathered at the edge, robes glowing in the fading sunlight, their faces tense with caution. Lyra stood a little apart, as always, her silver eyes fixed on the descending craft. She could feel her heart racing in her chest. When the doors opened, men and women stepped out clad in uniforms marked with strange symbols. They walked with steady discipline, their boots pressing deep into the soil, their eyes scanning the unfamiliar landscape. Most of her people stiffened at the sight, murmuring among themselves about the danger of such creatures. But Lyra did not see danger in their movements. She saw weariness, strength, and something else, a silent weight they carried, as if the universe itself pressed upon their shoulders. Among them was Captain Daniel Hayes. He was taller than most, his face marked by a scar that ran from his brow to his cheek. His eyes, however, were not hard like many of the others. They carried sorrow, as if he had lost something long ago that still lived in his memory. When his gaze swept across the alien crowd, it lingered just for a breath on Lyra. And in that moment she felt something she had never felt before. Seen. The meeting began with formal words. Leaders of her people stepped forward, speaking in voices smooth and cold. Human commanders answered in their own language, their tones steady but guarded. The two sides spoke of peace, of alliances, of the possibility of trade. Yet beneath the polished words, suspicion hung heavy in the air. Neither side truly trusted the other. Lyra listened, though she stood behind the crowd, unnoticed. Her people whispered among themselves, criticizing the humans' rough appearance, their scars, their direct way of speaking. But Lyra's attention kept drifting back to the man with the scarred face. He did not sneer. He did not carry himself with arrogance. Instead, he seemed to be watching everything with quiet care, as if searching for meaning in every detail. Later, that evening, when the humans set up camp on the plain, Lyra found herself drawn there. She told herself it was only curiosity, but deep down she knew it was more. She moved silently along the rocks until she could see the glow of their fires. She watched them laugh in groups, share food from metal containers, and speak in a language full of sharp edges but warm tones. Their way of being was different, less polished than her people. Yet there was a life in them that she found beautiful. It was then that she heard a sound behind her. She turned sharply and froze. Captain Hayes stood a few steps away, his figure outlined by the flicker of the campfire. For a moment, neither spoke. He did not raise a weapon or call for guards. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying her with calm eyes. Lyra's instinct was to flee, for she had been told humans were dangerous, but something in his gaze stopped her. It was not the stare of someone looking at a stranger. It was the look of someone who recognized loneliness in another. He spoke a few words, slow and careful, as if trying not to startle her. She did not understand the sounds, but his voice was steady, not threatening. She replied softly in her own tongue, shaking her head to show she did not know his language. For a moment they stood in silence, separated by words yet connected by something deeper. Daniel, realizing she could not understand, slowly placed his hand on his chest and said his name. Daniel. Lyra blinked, then whispered her own. Lyra. It was the simplest exchange, but it felt like a bridge had formed between two distant worlds. The next days brought more chances to see him. Daniel often accompanied his fellow soldiers during talks with the elders, and though most of her people avoided looking directly at the humans, Lyra found her eyes drifting toward him. Sometimes she caught him watching her too, not with judgment but with a kind of quiet respect. When their gazes met, she felt the corners of her heart stir, as if a door long locked had been opened just a little. No one in her world had ever looked at her that way, not as an outcast, not as a mistake, but simply as herself. Her people noticed her curiosity and disapproved. They whispered even more harshly than before. "She does not belong to us," some muttered. "Look at her, staring at the humans like a lost child." But their disapproval no longer pierced her as deeply as it once did. For the first time, there was someone who made her believe she was not invisible. Daniel, too, seemed drawn toward her. Whenever he could, he tried to speak small words, teaching her pieces of his language, pointing to objects and naming them. She learned quickly, and soon they could share simple thoughts. Their conversations were broken, but they were enough. Enough to laugh at small mistakes, enough to share fragments of stories, enough to feel less alone. For Daniel, who had lost so much in war, her presence was like a gentle light. For Lyra, who had known only rejection, his attention was like warmth after endless cold. Neither fully understood why, but both felt it. A bond beginning to grow, fragile yet strong. Her people saw none of this. To them, the humans were only dangerous outsiders, and Lyra remained the strange woman who did not belong. But in the quiet spaces between duty and suspicion, in stolen moments under the stars, a human soldier and an alien woman had begun to see each other, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two hearts quietly reaching out. And though neither of them knew where this fragile bond would lead, both felt a truth stirring inside. Something had changed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The days turned into weeks, and slowly the presence of humans became part of daily life on Lyra's world. To most of her people, the soldiers were tolerated but never trusted. Meetings with leaders continued, trade discussions stretched late into the night, and tension hung like a shadow over every conversation. Yet away from the eyes of the elders and commanders, something else was quietly happening. A bond forming between one alien woman and one human soldier. Lyra found herself looking forward to the moments when Daniel would appear. He often walked with his group, speaking to his men, but whenever his eyes found her in the crowd, there was a flicker of warmth that made her feel less invisible. Sometimes, when the others were busy, he would step aside to speak with her. There, words were still broken, stitched together with gestures and expressions, but little by little they built understanding. Daniel carried a small book, filled with drawings and words in his language. He began showing it to her, pointing to pictures of trees, rivers, and animals from Earth. He would say the words slowly, and she would repeat them, sometimes clumsily, which made him smile. In return, Lyra would point to things in her own world, the glowing plants, the crystals that hummed softly at night, the creatures that soared across the skies, and share the words of her language. It became a game, a rhythm of learning that slowly bridged the distance between their worlds. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the valley, Daniel sat with her by a stream. He told her, in simple words, about his home. He spoke of wide oceans that roared like living giants, of forests so dense the light barely touched the ground, of cities that shone brighter than stars. Though his words were limited, his eyes told the rest. They carried both pride and sorrow. She understood that Earth was not just a home, but a place filled with memories, some beautiful, some painful. Lyra, in turn, shared her own truths. She told him how her people treated her as different, how she had grown up alone, how she longed for a place where she truly belonged. Daniel listened without judgment, his gaze steady, his silence filled with understanding. When she finished, he did not offer false comfort. Instead, he simply placed his hand over his heart. A gesture she had learned meant sincerity. In that quiet act, she felt more comfort than in 1,000 words. As their bond grew, so did the disapproval around them. The elders noticed Lyra spending more time near the humans. They whispered warnings, saying her behavior was shameful. Friends she once tried to please now turned their backs more openly. But where their rejection once crushed her spirit, now it only pushed her closer to Daniel. For the first time, she had someone who looked at her as though she mattered. Daniel also faced suspicion. Some of his fellow soldiers teased him lightly, calling him the diplomat of the heart. Others warned him that getting too close to an alien would only cause trouble. But Daniel was not swayed. He had lived through years of war, seen too, much death and loss. To him, the small spark of connection he found with Lyra was worth more than the approval of others. Their closeness grew in small but meaningful ways. One afternoon, when the winds rose and storms threatened, Daniel offered her his jacket, a heavy piece of fabric unlike anything she had worn. It was warm, carrying the faint scent of earth and metal. She pulled it around herself and smiled, feeling a comfort she had never known before. He watched her with a soft expression, as though seeing her smile was enough to ease his own burdens. Another time, when a group of children mocked Lyra, Daniel stood beside her, his voice firm as he defended her. Though the children scattered, whispers spread quickly. Many elders frowned at the sight, claiming that the human was interfering where he had no right. But Lyra felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time in her life, someone had chosen to stand with her instead of against her. One night, under a sky filled with endless stars, Lyra asked him a question. Her words were broken, but her meaning was clear. Why did he care? She was an outcast, unwanted even by her own kind. What made him see her differently? Daniel thought for a long moment before answering. His voice was quiet, almost like a whisper to the universe. Because I know pain. I know loss. You are not weak. You are strong. And you are real. Those words stayed with her long after he spoke them. They repeated in her heart like a melody she never wanted to forget. She realized that he did not see her flaws as shameful. He saw them as part of her strength. And in his eyes, she was not broken but whole. As the weeks passed, the fragile connection between them deepened into something undeniable. They laughed at small mistakes in language, shared food when no one was watching, and walked together in the quiet edges of the valley. Each moment felt simple, yet it carried a weight neither could explain. But not everyone was blind to what was happening. Rumors began to spread more widely, stirring unease. Elders spoke of danger, warning that such closeness would only bring conflict. Some of Daniel's commanders, too, grew uneasy, reminding him of his duty and the importance of keeping emotions separate from diplomacy. Pressure rose from both sides, threatening to pull them apart before their bond could fully bloom. Yet even in the face of disapproval, Lyra and Daniel did not step back. The more the world pushed against them, the more they held on to the small moments they shared. For them, the connection was not a weakness but a lifeline. Neither knew what the future would bring. But deep inside, they both felt the same truth. In a universe filled with walls and divisions, they had found something rare. A human soldier and an alien outcast had discovered in each other what they had long searched for, a sense of belonging. And though the storm of resistance was only beginning, both knew they were no longer alone in facing it. The bond between Lyra and Daniel had grown stronger with each passing day, but so had the pressures around them. Both the alien elders and the human commanders began to notice what was happening, and neither side approved. To them, the connection between a soldier and an outcast alien was not only unusual but dangerous. Lyra was summoned by the Council of Elders one evening. She stood in the great chamber, its walls carved with glowing crystals, while the elders sat in their high seats, gazing down at her with stern expressions. Their voices carried a cold weight as they reminded her of her place. They told her she was already a shame to their people, wandering too close to the humans, speaking their words, and daring to be seen with one of them. They gave her a choice: turn away from Daniel and live quietly among them, or continue her path and face complete exile. The words struck her heart like stones. She had lived her whole life craving acceptance from her people, yet every step she took to be herself only pushed her further away. Now they were asking her to abandon the one person who truly saw her. For the first time, she did not bow her head in silence. Her voice shook, but she answered firmly, "I have never belonged to you. You rejected me before the humans ever came. If exile is the cost of being true, then I will carry it." The elders dismissed her with cold faces, but she walked out with her head higher than ever before. Though fear pressed on her chest, a quiet strength burned in her heart. She knew what mattered now: Daniel, too, faced pressure from his side. His commander called him into the command tent, where maps and glowing screens filled the space. The officer's voice was sharp as he warned Daniel to stop letting his personal feelings interfere with the mission. "We are here for diplomacy, not romance," the commander said. "You risk everything if you keep crossing lines." Daniel stood silent, fists clenched at his sides. He respected his duty, but he also knew the truth in his heart. When the officer dismissed him, he walked out into the night, staring up at the unfamiliar stars. He whispered to himself, "I've lost too much already. I won't lose her." As if the tension between them and their leaders was not enough, another crisis soon struck. The planet's weather, often unpredictable, turned violent. Strange, storms swept across the valleys, bringing heavy winds and floods that threatened both the alien settlement and the human camp. Structures fell, crops were destroyed, and people scrambled for safety. In the chaos, it was Lyra who acted first. She remembered the caves in the eastern cliffs, deep and strong enough to withstand the storms. While many panicked, she shouted instructions, guiding children and families toward the shelter. Some hesitated, still mistrusting her, but when Daniel appeared by her side and repeated her words in his firm voice, people listened. Together they led groups through the raging winds, shielding them from falling debris, pulling the weak to their feet, refusing to give up even when the storm grew worse. Hours passed in struggle. Lyra's robe was torn, her skin scraped. But she did not stop. Daniel stayed close, helping her lift beams, carrying the injured, shouting encouragement to those who faltered. In that terrible night, they were not alien and human, not soldier and outcast. They were simply two souls fighting to protect others. When at last the storm calmed and dawn broke, the survivors looked at Lyra with new eyes. They had seen her bravery, her selflessness. For the first time, whispers were not filled with scorn but with awe. Some of her people bowed their heads in shame, realizing how wrongly they had judged her. Yet even with this change, the councils and commanders still resisted. They feared what her bond with Daniel symbolized, but for Lyra and Daniel, the storm had proven something greater than fear. Together they had faced danger and saved lives. No warning or threat could erase the truth they now carried. Their loyalty to one another was unshakable, and so even as new challenges loomed, both knew they were ready to stand against the world if they had to. For the first time, they were not only surviving, they were choosing each other. In the days that followed the storm, the settlement slowly rebuilt. Fallen homes were repaired, damaged fields replanted, and the fear of nature's fury began to fade. Yet something had shifted, not only in the land but in the hearts of the people. Lyra, once an outcast, was no longer ignored. Many remembered how she had guided them to safety, how she had risked her life without hesitation. Some came to her with quiet words of thanks. Others, too proud to speak, still gave her nods of respect when they passed. For Lyra, the change felt like sunlight after a long winter. But though the people's attitude softened, she knew her real strength came from the man who had stood beside her. Daniel did not treat her as a savior or a symbol. To him, she was simply Lyra, the woman who had filled a space in his heart he thought would remain empty forever. One evening, as the settlement settled into calm, Lyra and Daniel walked together along the riverbank. The moons reflected on the water, casting silver light across their faces. Lyra turned to him, her voice soft. "Why do you stay? Your commanders do not want this. My people do not want this. Still you stay." Daniel stopped walking and looked at her. His scar caught the moonlight, but his eyes were gentle. "Because I know what it feels like to lose everything," he said quietly. "I lost my family in the war. I lived with duty but no joy. And then I met you. You remind me what it means to live again. If I walk away, I lose the only thing that makes me whole." Lyra's heart trembled at his words. For so long she had believed she was unworthy of love, destined to walk alone. But here was a man who saw her not as an outcast, not as a burden, but as the answer to his own loneliness. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sorrow, but of a joy she had never dared to dream. Their bond became known to all. Some still disapproved. Others feared what it meant for the future, but no one could deny the truth. They had chosen each other. Even the elders, though unwilling, realized they could no longer control Lyra's path. The human commanders too saw that Daniel would not abandon what he had found. Instead of breaking them, the resistance only made their connection stronger. They worked side by side in rebuilding efforts, teaching children from both sides, sharing food, and creating small bridges of trust between two worlds. Slowly, their love became less a scandal and more a symbol. People began to whisper not of shame but of hope, that maybe, if an alien outcast and a human soldier could stand together, peace between their peoples was possible. One morning, as the suns rose over the valley, Daniel took Lyra to the highest hill, the place where she had once sat alone to watch the stars. He remembered her telling him that she used to whisper her thoughts to the sky, hoping someone might hear. Standing there now, he took her hand in his, warm and steady. "You don't have to whisper anymore," he said softly. "You're not alone." Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink into her soul. The girl who had once believed she was unwanted was now cherished more deeply than she had ever imagined. From that day forward, their story was told not as a tale of shame, but as a lesson of courage. Lyra, the alien woman once rejected by her own people, had found strength not in their approval but in the love of someone who saw her true self. Daniel, the soldier hardened by war, had found healing not in duty, but in the gentle bond they shared. Together they stood as proof that love could cross any boundary, of species, of culture, of fear. And though the universe remained vast and uncertain, neither of them doubted where they belonged. Lyra finally understood that rejection had not broken her. It had led her here, to the one who wanted only her. And Daniel knew that in choosing her he had chosen life, hope, and a future worth fighting for. Under the endless stars, two hearts once lost had found each other, and their story became a light that no storm could ever extinguish.